happens when you're trying to help out your clerk on a Friday afternoon, that the legislative gets doubled twice so it just shows I can't cut and paste. So when you all approve the agenda, we can go over the legislative items just once and not twice. So that is on me, not our wonderful clerk. I was trying to help her because we had our retreat the next day. She was overworking there, and I was trying to help out. So you can tell that in the future, don't let Holly do cut and paste. But is there a motion to just approve the agenda for the legislative items only one time?
Move to approve.
Second.
All right. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Is there a motion to approve, or has there been time to review the November 5th meeting minutes?
I move to approve the minutes. On page 5, the third line needs to say stated and state instead of the word that is there.
Any other?
Second with amendment.
All right. Moved and seconded with the amendment as noted. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Motion carries, and the meeting minutes from November 5th are approved with the edit as noted. All right. We have our discussion. We're just sort of recapping a little bit the use of the common metrics by both boards. That was something we seem to have chatted a little bit about last time. I believe also Ms. Bomke and I are also very cognizant. We would like to keep our meeting short and to the point this evening again. So this was just a review of the common metrics used by both boards. I don't know if either staff or either Mr. Presley or Dr. Kisner have any comments on these. I don't know if we need to work through these, but I know this was something we highlighted and just wanted to bring that to, if there were any comments or anything that we wanted to have staff or the boards work on our metrics. Salary scale, I think we had already talked about sort of being like a Spotsy and Prince William. Sure, we can do that on E. Is there any thought about revisiting the student generation factor per household and with new construction? That I really defer to staff if they want to or not.
I think staff is pretty agreeable about what we're doing now, and it's based upon the data. So, and we constantly update that data. So I think everyone's in agreement on that.
All right, great. And then comparison localities for Stafford County. I think we talked about using some of the ones that were presented, but I didn't know if there were any changes or any other, localities that we wanted examined. There was.
I think there was some discussion in our meeting last night about the number of our teachers that do end up leaving to go to Fairfax. So I don't know where people were with that, whether that was on our side, whether that was something we wanted to argue for, or whether we want to leave it with Spotsy and Prince William.
So one of the questions I have is if we're going to compare ourselves to Fairfax as one of our comparative localities, that to make that comparison, we have to look at the not the COLA, the COCA, because when you look at the amount of COCA that they get, I don't know how our community can compare. We're not going to tax our constituents, residents, citizens, call them what you want, to come up with Fairfax numbers, unless the school division and the county can go back to the General Assembly and request that we get put in that top tier. And I'm sure then Prince William's going to want to be in that top tier as well. I mean, that's the only thing that I'm aware of that can make a huge impact to compare ourselves to Fairfax.
Was it just, I'm sorry, was it just Fairfax we were talking about, or Prince William?
Prince William and Spotsy seem to be what we were, but I also know that Mr. Burnett's going to give us an overview or a preview of our salary initiative that the board saw last night, and he'll have a little bit of background as well on where the teachers are going. How about we loop that in during that discussion? But I do think that the Spotsy and Prince William seem like something we all had some agreement with, and then it's really whether to add something northern. And
Right.
so why don't we have Mr. Burnett at least present that information? The board saw that last night, so you're getting it really fresh off the press. So let's see.
So I have a question on the Fairfax information as far as, do you all have data that shows, are those people living in Stafford, Spotsylvania, even as far down as Ladysmith and commuting? Or are they moving up to that area and living and absorbing that higher cost of living? Do you have any information on that?
Let me have Mr. Burnett, let's do that when he goes through his information, unless, Mr. Burnett, if you want to make a comment on that now, or sort of we're looping into, I know, our salary initiative in the background with that.
Yeah, I think it's also, Chris could present the numbers, but I think when you see how much Fairfax gets for cost to compete in relationship to their total budget, it's not, it'd be nice to have what they have, but it's a very small percentage of their total budget. The state has a formula, and they cap Fairfax at a certain number. So, again, we'll let the data, I think you have to see the data to understand it. But that's not driving Fairfax's salaries based on the cost to compete, what money they receive. They have a budget that's in the billions.
Correct.
And how much money do they get for cost to compete?
35 million.
They
Right.
get 35 million out of, what is their budget, 2 billion?
Yeah, roughly. I'd have to look it up
Yeah,
to get
so
the
I'm
official.
just saying, 35 million would be nice to have, but it's a $2 billion budget. So percentage-wise, with all their employees, that's not driving. We're using Fairfax because we're collecting the data where our staff go. And they go to Prince William, Fairfax, when we look up north, and when we look south, Spotsylvania. I don't know if we have the other, maybe Patrick knows where people are living.
Going to a microphone to make sure that you can hear me. Chair Bomke, while we have addressed data for employees that have submitted resignation, I would hesitate to rely on it to answer the question that you're posing, because someone might have a Stafford address today when they resign with us with the intention to move to Fairfax. We wouldn't have that information, and the reverse would be true as well. So the best we would be able to do would be the last known address that we had for them, which would make it difficult to go back historically over a several-year period.
Okay, thank you.
I also just threw out there just sort of the comparison localities in some sense, do we compare with triple bond rated? These were just sort of some thoughts of things that I think that we heard from there. Again, we don't need to keep belaboring that point, but Ms. Shelton?
Yeah, I wanted to add it in at the end, is the update, because I promised to do some research on what I could find on private schools. And I contacted, if this is an appropriate time, just to let you know what I found. And it's just, I know that it's notional data and it's not true data, because I'm doing a telephone inquiry and I have no idea, beyond that. And so I contacted 5 different private schools, and 2 of them gave me their actual capacity numbers, and 3 of them told me they doubled their capacity this year. And capacity, not people that are attended. And every one of them told me they had a waiting list. 3 of them were pre-K through 7th grade. I don't understand that break there, and 2 of them were pre-K to 12. And then within the constituents in Aquia, because that's the only people I really know. Then I found 6 parents that I contacted, and all of them are sending their children to a private school, but all of them but one of them is planning on continuing the private school. And it was a very interesting conversation, and I just was wondering that it would make sense to me, if that's a competitor of yours, that you guys might try to keep that information for comparative analysis within your own decision-making. Just a thought.
Sure, I think that they're, parents choose for a variety of reasons, and some private schools can offer some services, but there are some services that really, in my opinion, you can only get in the public schools, that we're always going to have the majority, I believe, of the kids, and, I do believe that our kindergarten class next year is going to be huge, because I think a lot of people may have kept their kindergartner or to-be kindergartner for a year. So I think that there will be the bubble class of kindergarten for a long time to come, because if some of my friends who said, gosh, if this had happened when my child who's a summer birthday, I probably would have waited a year, So I think we're going to have the bubble class of kindergarten for a long time.
Yeah, the argument, and I mean argument as in, debating argument, the argument was related to the discussion of how many children do we anticipate coming back, and you guys said you didn't know. And I'm just saying that it wasn't that hard to get, and it sure seemed like they were pretty transparent. And I don't know if I got lucky and called the only 5 schools. I mean, I don't know. I'm not the school board. I'm not you guys. I just was really curious on, what is the perspective? Because I'm a product of public school myself, so my parents couldn't afford to go to private school, or send me
So
to
can I-
private school.
I don't actually view it so much as being a competitor. I mean, it actually, for the county's purposes, it saves us money if people send their children to private school. Because then we're not educating those children, and the locality doesn't have to provide the funds for that. So from my perspective, I would be surprised if it has a really long-term effect, but if it does, it will probably save the county money.
It's interesting.
One thing I will tell you, when we met here a couple weeks ago, we did not have this data. I'm sorry, thank you.
We met in the chamber.
When we met here a couple weeks ago, we did not have this data. We shared with you how many students we were down, and in the month of November, a little bit, I think 53 of those kids have already returned to our school system. So we had the October 30th to November 30th numbers. So we met with the elementary principals yesterday, and they're reporting from the families that chose to keep their children home for kindergarten. They're planning to come back. They're already seeing requests for kindergarten registration. Stafford, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, we're a growing community. So, I guess what I'm really sharing with you is that this year, every school system has an asterisk by their enrollment. Our school system, like the Loudons and the Prince Williams, we're still growing, okay? School systems that are not growing, they may not make up that lost enrollment. But we're going to make it just by the continued growth. But the projections that you guys have seen and and working with the planning is holding true. And so we're concerned next year seeing 2 bubbles, first grade and kindergarten. Because if a parent took their kid out of kindergarten this year, but put them in either homeschooling or some type of instruction, they have the option to go into first grade next year.
Right.
And then some will choose to have my kid just start kindergarten next year. So we're going to have the regular rising 5-year-olds and then the 5 to 6-year-olds. So we are concerned that we're going to see I don't want to say bubble, but we're going to see a significant increase at the kindergarten level next year.
I think that makes sense. Well, let's move on, because we'll have some other ways to look at our growth. I know there was a request about the Mary Washington campus, so I will, I believe, turn that over to Mr. Presley or to whomever, or Ms. Bomke.
I'll let Mr. Presley report on that.
So we did have a meeting with the president of Mary Washington University and some of their staff, specifically about the existing campus that they have in South Stafford, what their plans were long-term for that, what the opportunities might be. Obviously, the school board currently leases space there, I believe like a floor and a half or 2 floors, I'm not sure exactly. But we were asking them, what is the opportunity there, if there is one? Because before we came back to you all and said, let's look at something, we want to make sure there was an opportunity. Long and short of it is they are completely open to any potential offer we might make on that, be it to long-term lease for portions, the entire thing, or purchase at this point. So given that information, we just thought it would be useful to come back to you all and see if you've given some more thought to the idea of, I know at our last joint board meeting we had on the CIP, Supervisor Cohen talked about, thinking more creatively about how we might move forward with looking at high schools. The suggestion's been made about maybe a technology and science high school, and then you could have a more creative campus than the traditional one with all the sports and other things that you would need in it. Also been suggested that maybe in the wake of the pandemic, maybe there's a new way to look at a high school in the county to say it would be a hybrid, where it'd be a bulk of it or a good portion of the learning could be online for those students that choose to do that, and then they could have some other in-person stuff that could be utilized in a space like this. So we're just throwing it out there, honestly, just to see if there is any interest, because the college would like to know, if we do have any interest in the near term. We would like to know from a CIP perspective, because if you were to entertain some kind of a hybrid approach or some form of a high school that could maybe delay the building of the high school, which we're already kind of behind the 8 ball on. We don't have the property yet. We don't have any of those things in place yet. If that's a possibility, obviously a lot of thinking and planning would have to happen. But if it is a possibility, that we believe that's a worthwhile exercise to work on, first with you all as the school board, but then maybe together we can come up with some solutions long-term, even with the building of the next high school. That campus could be a real resource for the schools down the line. And thinking creatively, it could be the existing buildings, it could be the existing buildings with additions or other buildings built on that property. It could still be a lot less than building a new high school right out of the gate, and maybe we're still going to have to build a new high school, we know that. But could we push that down the line a little bit? So it's just a conversation we thought it was worth having with this group first. And if there's no interest, then we'll move on. But I think it's a worthwhile opportunity there, because they are going to continue to market it and look for other suitors, I believe. So I don't know, Ms. Bomke, if you'd like to add anything to that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, the only thing I would add is Dr. Payno did say it's typically a 6 to 9 month process to sell a piece of property. You have to declare it as excess, and it is a process. You have to go through the General Assembly, and they're obviously not utilizing all the space, and you're aware of that because you have students over there. But we definitely left it with them that it was not a decision of the county. We just wanted to have that conversation with them, and that it was a conversation that the school board needs to have if they choose to have it. So that was kind of how we left it.
Let me make a quick comment, and then if staff wants to make a further one, please know that we have been in contact with them about use of that building. This is not a surprise for them. However, and I don't want to discuss numbers because I know what they have asked us for to rent it, because they would love that income flow. We, when evaluating aging infrastructure and other items that we have elected, that it's a decent lease rate. I guess I'll just say it that way, and you all may know what it is, for those two buildings. That if that is something that we would like, to pursue, for everything, it's always an opportunity cost. Do I believe that this has a potential use for the county in general, whether it's the schools or not? I mean, that's a beautiful auditorium of anything. But I think it impacts much more the Board of Supervisors' impact on a high school 7 request than 6, partly because, a technology and science and high school, that's a lot of recounting and a lot more staff for us, because then we're not going to be we would not offer those programs in our schools. And I like that we integrate a lot of so I think it is a conversation the school board can have. I don't believe, having sat through a different purchase of a already made school, it doesn't feel like there's as much urgency to it from that perspective. I'm sure Dr. Pano, he knows how to reach us too if it became that way. But I think the school board will have to evaluate what do we give up in order to do that. So that's just my own personal thoughts. But please know that we are very much in contract with them since we're under lease with them, and we're always asking for more space. It's just what is the cost, and it is not inexpensive. But I don't want to speak for staff and for Dr. Kisner.
Madam Chairman?
Sure.
Man, I sure hope that you guys consider this. And I've talked to you guys before, and all of you privately and jointly, when we had the last joint working group, about the creation of a magnet school of some type to be able for our children. And I know that some of you had wanted to do that, but it just never, it was just a lot of work. And so this just seems like a golden opportunity that, we could, and we're talking about us working with you on this. And we're not talking about stopping the high school number 6 or 7. We know we need it. But man, if that campus is sitting there and you guys can look at your curriculum and consolidate the use of it, it's in a beautiful location. And and we would always, Holly, to your point, we would always do our due diligence, and we know you would too. So being concerned about whether the aging or whatever the heck is wrong with the building, because there's always something, we would expect to know that. But I think what we're asking is, have you considered thinking out of, I'm not going to say that word, out of the box, but have you considered looking at some consolidation of some of your different types of programs and putting them in a location that would be phenomenal? And just a thought, because I'm always a proponent of magnet schools, no matter whether they're STEM or anything else. Just my passion and enthusiasm.
Madam Chair? Yeah, so one of the things that... Okay. Yeah, one of the conversations that Cindy and I did have was about using, prior to that was the school on 610, but definitely we talked about Mary Washington also. In addition, Magnet, I was also thinking about educating parents, and sometimes now in this COVID age that we're in, with a certain number of parents unable to make their children be able to be in school during the day or being able to be with the kids, this is an opportunity to perhaps use a location for families, just thinking about parents that are working during the day and, need to educate themselves during the night, but then their kids are also being educated for those 2 hours because they haven't been able to do the hybrid. I mean, just thinking on things that you could use it for, but definitely that was one, and also using it for some specialty programs that we talked about, right, Cindy?
Don't get me excited.
Yeah, the specialty programs that we talked about would also be able to be utilized in that.
So,
yeah.
Ms.
ahead.
Hazard,
Yep.
Chairwoman Hazard, it sounds like maybe we need to put this on our agenda to have our board decide if they want to instruct staff to consider coming up with a plan for us or something. Because there are clearly lots of issues that we as board members may not be taking everything into consideration. And it needs to be a decision of the entire board.
And I think making sure that, I know very much of concern has been the CIP and the funding. This will be a big chunk into that funding request. So I think seeing where that comes in. But yes, I think that would be great. We can have the board, and depending on the specifics of the discussion, it may be a closed-door session. So we are going to pursue it. We just haven't since, it's not been that long since we all met. But please know that I think thinking creatively and getting our kids, believe me, having that program over there, I don't know how many of you all have seen our Phoenix Center and being there and what a change that has made. And that came out of sitting in the parking lot, seeing a empty building with a member of the Mary Washington Foundation. So keep our ears and eyes open for all opportunities. So, but thank you for bringing that. Let's move, since we're in infrastructure, I think perfect on our aging school infrastructure, our 3R list. One thing I felt like we did talk a lot about was at the last meeting, or at least touched our joint meeting on just bringing the reality of, believe it or not, we're a growing community, but we did a lot of growth around 1990, 91. I think, let's see, because Colonial Forge turned 20 years old, I think last year. I believe it was last year, and there was a cluster of schools that were built within in that time period. And one thing that, you know, we are very proud of is how we keep the buildings, but I think that's something we want to bring, things that we see on the horizon coming, is just aging infrastructure for us, and how we want to, you know, work together to come up with a plan. Is kind of my thought is, so I'm looking over more at Mr. Fulmer and Dr. Kisner. You may be able to give us the big picture, but I think we presented some of that information. But to me, this is a trying to issue spot for the future that they're not getting any, neither is my house, but, and my stuff needs to be replaced. So it's really, should we be looking towards, or should we want to be talking about, in general, how do we deal with aging infrastructure? So I'm just throwing it out as a larger topic.
Are you saying that you think that there's some synergy for us working on it together, as opposed to, like, we have our 3R list and you have your 3R list?
I think in terms of funding in general, are we looking at increasing some of our reserve funds for things that age? I don't, like, in my own family, you sort of know the roof's going to go in so many years, and maybe we have that as a broad plan in general, but maybe we need to modify formulas, or saying, now that things are getting over 20 years old, and I'm not the numbers person, maybe we need to put an additional percentage into that fund. That's just sort of my thinking, but maybe, like I said, I'm not the numbers person, but it's more thinking, as things get older, should we, like we're doing in our own house, putting a little bit more in that savings account, waiting for the heater to go.
Are you sure you don't do that now? Because I know our county staff does that for our facilities. And when they're looking at managing the facilities, and they're looking at those capital outlays for those really big ticket items, because there's a standard time when they're going to, expect it to expire. So I'm just saying, I really think you're doing that.
Well, I do, but I think every year we look at the 3R list and things fall off because we don't have the funds to do that. So I am just bringing forward thoughts that I think that we have, that we should be, and I'm looking over at Mr. Fulmer. I don't know if you have any comment, and I don't mean to put you on the hot seat on that, but just any comment on the general, I just see it as a long-term investment we're going to need to be making.
Yeah, I'll add that in the CIP report that everyone received at last week's board meeting, our 3R list is in there. In addition to, you'll find a listing of each of our schools and when they were built, when the last major, addition was on those schools, and it gives you a little bit of perspective on the age of our buildings. Additionally, I think what Ms. Hazard, the big point she's trying to make is on our 3R list right now, and then in the presentation that Lionel did last week, emphasizing that over the 10 years, we have $40 million worth of projects that we can't do because we don't have the funding identified for it. So right now we have our bond funding of about 5.5, and then the cash set aside funds of about $1.5 million. And with that accumulated over the 10 years, we're still $40 million short because of just the size of our buildings, the number of buildings that we have, and the age of them. And exactly as what you were saying, Ms. Shelton, is we do have a list, and we have planned based on life expectancy. And because we don't have the funding, those things get bumped to the next year. And then so it just keeps accumulating each year as those get bumped. And then we find ourselves in emergency situations with HVAC units and trying to fix those. So what the board has talked about is developing a better funding strategy for trying to get caught up on those on the 3R list.
And I think it's just trying to be a team and bring forth the issues. I mean, if any of you looked at the bond referendums that were passed in November, how many of them involved schools? How many of them involved even aging infrastructure was part of the specific bond request? I am not advocating, I'm just saying there were many of them. I think it was 10 that I looked at. And some of them were to rehab. Now, it was all over the county in Virginia, and I'm not advocating, but I do think, as we always say, we got to look outside because keeping our buildings safe, and if we ever have to close them, it would be tough, for us. So it's really just a working together, bringing, in my opinion, I call it the issue spotting of it's coming.
We're game.
Yeah. So.
Well, and Madam Chair, I mean, we have the same things. I'll look over at Mike Smith, since he used to be in charge of utilities. We just had a big main break. We have, our utilities infrastructure is very old. I know people that probably don't sleep every night because they're like, oh, is that water main going to break tonight? So, I mean, we have very similar issues. Of course, our utilities as an enterprise fund, so it's very different. But, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and so I'm sitting here thinking about all the different formulas that they probably have in that massive spreadsheet with all the tabs and what the escalators are. It's kind of like we all do this with our own house. Oh, wow, I invested and we should need a new roof this year, but let's put that off for another 2 or 3 years. And unless you have a leak, that's typically what you do. We always try to squeeze that extra nickel out if we possibly can. So I think there's a balance there, and maybe looking at and combining, looking at the escalators that you use and what projects are falling off and what the priorities are. And I don't know how you guys grade your priorities. Is it like our CIP project where we have the metrics? I mean, I don't know. That would be for your gentleman sitting in the back row back there. But anyway, it's definitely worth a conversation.
I think it's just a larger conversation. Yes, Mr.
Well, I think, too, it's not just a 3R conversation, it's a financial policy conversation. So our financial policy says that we will set aside 3%, right, Andrea, of our budget every year dedicated to 3R capital, okay? And that's what we do. I believe we made the same recommendation many years ago for the schools for 2%. I don't think that's ever been done. I think in practice, what has been done is that at the end of the year, if you have money left over, you come back to us and say, we'd like to dedicate this to capital. Sometimes it gets to the 2%, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's really about financial policy. You have to plan for that stuff, to your point, Holly. I think, if it's your house, if you're not setting that money aside in an account, when you know it's time you're going to need to replace those things, the money's not there. And I think as part of the budget process, we need to work on that. And it should be policy, and it should be followed because, and I know it's easy to say, well, it's a really tough year and we need to use the money for this year. But as soon as you do that, you're done. It's no longer going to work. So I think looking at the list, looking at what you have coming up, looking at the $40 million shortfall over time, what is that percentage that you need to start chipping away at so that, we don't end up in a much worse situation 10 years down the line? And you got to stick to it. I mean, that's the challenge of it.
I think one of the challenges for me with the school board budget, and I guess it's going back to several years ago, us being able to have reserve funds. I mean, in my house account, we have what I call our reserve funds. And to me, that's kind of even the conversations we can have. I know that we had them several years ago and started to create some reserve accounts because it's hard for us because then at the end of the year, we're under some weird, and I would call it budget restraints, but it's just a policy and just something I feel like this body and this group is to share issues that you see coming. And I know that, and as we have more people and more people come, there's even more strain on all of our infrastructure. So it's probably a broader discussion, but anyway, it just seems like one we wanted to highlight going forward.
Could you guys, I'm sorry, Madam Chairman, could you guys bring that back to the next meeting and, or maybe Chris can say now whether you guys have implemented that policy? Because, it's absolutely, like you said, Holly, it's common sense that any household would do it. And it makes sense that since Stafford's do it, not Stafford, but counties are doing it, that schools would do the same thing. So I actually didn't know that you didn't do that 2%. I made an assumption, and we know what that means.
I have a,
Sure,
Madam
Ms.
Chair, just a comment. So if we may have a formula, and there may be a financial policy in place, but setting that aside, having the metrics, if we start moving funds to that particular pot, will we still have to come to the Board of Supervisors and say, may we use the money for whatever? So if we get into a jam and have an emergency at some point, that we need to use that, because sometimes we're, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It is what it is, just like in our households, right? So how will that work? Having it is one thing, but having the funds to put in there is another, and making sure that we both understand what that money is for. Based on what Chris just said, we have 40 million that we need to support the schools to keep them up and running, unlike Prince William that could push out a high school and a middle school every year. We have to save ours, right? So it's just something that we need to take into consideration when we discuss this again.
Madam Chair, I don't know if Prince William, are they pushing out schools that fast? I heard that they shut down their building department, that they can't handle any more growth right now. I heard that the other day. They said no more building permits.
I know they've got a new school coming next year that I don't like the location of because they might poach. It is. We don't want them to poach. But anyway, I think it's something just in general for us to begin. The problem for us, though, is we can't just, it's how we deal with the reserve funds because we can't keep reserve funds. You all have to keep them. And so it's just sort of, I think, coming up with and recognizing how are we going to deal with that. And if it's such a massive number, even for the county, should we look at alternative funding mechanisms? I think is how I would just look at it.
If I might, maybe we could ask Andrea Light, our budget director, is the school, I know you cannot have any leftover funds at the end of the year, but are school divisions allowed to leave money with the county
Yes.
that is designated as school money?
I know we've done it in the past, but I will let,
While she's walking up, I can say the county does have a schools capital reserve fund, and it's really our year-end savings can go into that fund, or our unspent carryover money can go into that fund. So there's already, I don't know the exact number offhand, but Andrea and I and the rest of the staff have talked about it several times. And so there's several $1 million in there, and that's more of an emergency fund that we use. So it's not the 3% that we would set aside each year to go in there, but it is a reserve fund held on the county side, identified by the county for school emergency use.
Thank you, and that was kind of what I was going to say. Also, over the past few years, the board has made a practice of all meals tax above budget being set aside for schools' projects, as well as school debt service savings. It gets set aside for school projects. It does have to be appropriated by the Board of Supervisors so that it can be spent. I don't think that there's a way around that. And then, like Mr. Fulmer said, we put in schools' year-end funding.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said, an area for continued discussion. Let's leap over to our preview of the Stafford County Public Schools Salary Initiative. This was presented to the full board last night. Again, this is just a preview. We thought this was a good idea to give you all our preview. So I'm going to ask, I believe, it's going to be Mr. Burnett and Mr. Fulmer to give us an abbreviated overview of the why and the possible funding going forward. Again, this has just been previewed by the board. People have just begun to see it, but we thought this was a great opportunity to.
Thank you. So Patrick's really going to start at first, but while he's passing out hard copies of it, and we'll make sure that Missy gets it to our remote members. I apologize, but it's actually very similar to what was just presented last night if they can access our board docs or the FAB meeting from last week. They're posted on there. But Patrick and I have been really working on this for over a year, different iterations. And we alluded to our work on this at the last Joint Schools Working Committee, and wanting to get ahead of it and try to present it to our board and to the Board of Supervisors earlier in the budget process, so it's not a surprise later on, so we can get ahead of it. So Patrick is going to start with the details more of the why, and then he'll turn it back over to me to talk a little bit more about the scale and the investment.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to this body. Grateful to have the chance to present this evening. What we're hoping to do with what we share tonight is not just provide what the proposal is that we hope to include in the superintendent's funding request next month, but to give more of the rationale behind it, to give the background for what the challenges that we seek to solve right now, rather than simply saying we would like to pay more, to say what's the problem that we are hoping to solve by addressing our license scale, and by doing so, what's the targeted fashion in which we want to modify the scale to try to solve the problem that's identified. So we're going to lay out some criteria for success. That's where I'm going to hand it back over to Mr. Fulmer to describe what we plan to propose and what some of the implementation options are. That. So just as a starting place, I always like to start a problem analysis by saying, what does success look like? What are you trying to accomplish by anything that you have in place? And when it comes to a license scale, the thing that felt most important for me as a starting place was to recognize the value of our licensed personnel, especially our teachers, on the success of our students and as a result on our community. There's any number of studies that are out there that could fill this cafeteria of the role that teachers have in the long-term outcomes for students, not just in terms of the grades they achieve in school, but their long-term life outcomes. And given that it's an important place to be able to prioritize the funding that we use as a division. What we also want to make sure we do, though, is recognize that there's a labor market, but a real labor market for the people who we would have serve as our educators. It is tempting to simply compare school division to school division and say that the market for teachers is the market for teachers. But the truth is that most people who are teachers have options outside of teaching. And as a result, it's important for us to take into account not only what other school divisions are doing, but also the things that will pull people away from considering teaching in the first place, as well as the things that may cause them to leave the profession, and if so, when. And related to that, we want to make sure that our license scale minimizes economic-driven attrition. While it is true that nobody goes into education to get rich, it's still important to make sure that we mitigate the preventable economic attrition from the profession. And the last thing is that we do want to make sure that our scale represents the fiscal stewardship that we're responsible for as a public agency. So the proposal that we're coming to you with this evening for initial discussion is bold. We also think it's imperative, and it was done in respect of that fiscal stewardship, not in ignorance of it. Oh. Here we go. So I want to start with why we believe the license scale for our schools needs reform, and it fundamentally comes down to the pipeline in and the pipeline out of the classroom. And that isn't simply the pipeline to the people being in their first day as a teacher here and their last day as a teacher here, but also the factors that influence whether people will pursue the profession at all. An important thing that, as I mentioned, is that people have options and to understand where our salary structure is to make it appealing to consider teaching in the first place, especially for folks who are not in traditional preparation programs. But the other thing we want to acknowledge is that our current scale has what we're going to call a SAG in what we call the mid-career year, so people who are between 5 and 15 years of experience. And that SAG is where we see such a tremendous gap between what our salary scale offers and what the salary scales of other divisions offer. And that's where we face the greatest risk of losing some of our experienced and talented educators. I'm going to give a little bit more detail on those as we go through. To provide a little bit of framing on here, what I'm sharing here is U.S. Department of Education data that is required to be reported under the Higher Education Act from teacher preparation programs. And I wanted to share it to give a little bit of color to what we mean when we talk about the teacher shortage. I wish I had more recent data than 2017-18. That is the most recent reporting year with the feds, so forgive me for the delay on that. But I will say that this is a long-term trend, just the most recent data of it. And what I'm sharing here is showing that there is around a 20 to 25% reduction in the number of people who are completing educator preparation programs in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Over that 5-year period, it's 18% Commonwealth-wide. Here locally, almost a quarter fewer graduates from Mary Wash's teacher preparation programs compared to the same time in academic year 2014. In that same time period, our budget had a 4% increase in the number of teacher FTEs that were approved, largely to comply with the state staffing standards for the standards of quality, special education compliance, and to recognize the population growth in the county. So at the same time that we needed more teachers, that 4% increase is before we're replacing a single person that leaves. That's just new positions. We're seeing a tremendous reduction in the number of people who are traditionally prepared that are becoming teachers within Virginia. So, and that, I could make a duplicate side of this for pretty much every division that's in the Region 3 or Region 4 for the VDOE regional coalitions. So if we see this drop in the people who are traditionally prepared, who are available for hire, that means that for us to be able to bring people in to provide instruction for our students, we have to expand the pie. We have to think about who can we appeal to consider education who may not have previously, and we rely tremendously on teachers who are seeking licensure through what we call provisional pathway, where they've met enough of the credentialing requirements that we can hire them to a licensed position, then they have a period of time to meet those obligations. Those aren't people with an education degree. Those are people with a degree in something else that gives them lots of different options. And I don't think I necessarily need to belabor the idea that people with degrees in different areas are going to have a lot of different options that they can consider. So when we talk about the importance of considering that true labor market, that's where this comes from, is a recognition that we're no longer just going to the teacher preparation programs to recruit people, to sell them on Stafford. We're having to go to very different places, not both in Virginia and beyond. But it's not just about recruiting people who are new into the profession. It's recognizing the great talent that we have within the division already and what happens when those people choose to leave. The data that I'm sharing here is based on the voluntary exit survey that employees complete when they resign their positions with Stafford. So it's self-reported data, and so I'm not going to portray that it's 100% aligned. Not everyone tells us what they're doing when they leave our employment. However, among those who did tell us what they were doing and said, I'm leaving to go teach somewhere else, 60% more were going to Prince William than were going to Spotsy. You expand that out to Northern Virginia, it's 2.5 times as many are going north compared to going to Spotsy. And I think that's important to call out because it's very tempting to say, well, our comparisons are Prince William and Spotsy. They're our neighbors, that makes sense. But they're not equal. That's not where our competition, they aren't equal competitors in terms of the draw that they have for our teaching force. And for us, that's an important consideration. The other thing we want to point out is that it's not all teachers that have an equal pull to to consider leaving teaching Stafford to teach elsewhere or to pursue another opportunity for economic reasons. Data I'm sharing here is 4-year retention data among our licensed staff. And if you look at, I've done 2 breakouts here. So one is all of our licensed staff over that period, and another is looking just at what I call our mid-career groups. That's people with between 5 and 15 years of teaching experience. Overall, they leave at about the same rates, about 14% turnover annually. But when you look at the reasons they offered for what led them to leave their position with Stafford, those mid-career teachers were significantly more likely, those percentages might look small, but they're statistically significant. They were significantly more likely to cite economic reasons or family and personal reasons for why they were leaving their position with Stafford, regardless of what they were planning to do next. And those family and personal reasons often were economic reasons. They might have just said family and personal on the form, but they were saying, you know, I had a second kid and paying 2 daycares, I can't swing it. A very common theme that we saw. And so for us, that raised a big flag for us that this group, that 5 to 15 year, was the group that was most at risk of what we call that preventable economic attrition from our schools. And we think it's important to focus on that group for other reasons. There's a lot of evidence out there that says that the majority of professional improvement that teachers will experience in their careers happens in their first 5 years. I've said this now in 2 other public hearings, and I'm going to say it again for all the teachers out there that are working very hard right now to adapt their practice to the online environment and to all sorts of new challenges. We see you, we respect you. This is a more global observation. That most of the improvement you make is in those first 5 years of your career. And that's also where we invest a lot of resources in training our new teachers through our new teacher induction programming and other specialized training that we offer, especially for our special education teachers. And year 15 at the other end, that's where a lot of nearby divisions cap the amount of external service credit that they will provide to someone who's coming from the outside. So if you've got 30 years of teaching credit in Stafford and you go take a job in Fairfax, they're only going to credit you 15 years of experience. So it provides a nice natural zoom-in range to look at for consideration. And the last point here is that it's in this zoomed-in range where we see the gap between where our current base license scale is and where those other divisions are to the north broadens tremendously. The beginning of the scale, the gap between our scale and what's called here the Northern Virginia average, and I can share a little bit more about who's included in that, as Mr. Frommer when he gets to his piece, is a little shy of $5,000. That is not an insignificant sum of money, but it's small compared to what we're getting to. By year 5, that expands out to nearly $9,000, but by year 15, it's almost $22,000 difference that you can make working in one of these the average of the comparison divisions to Stafford. And for us, that's where it gets tremendously risky that these folks are going to leave for economic concerns. So with those challenges laid out, that helped us narrow in on what would success look like in changing the structure of our license scale, in targeting where that money would go. So one is that it would raise the entry point for the license scale as part of the overall effort to make joining Stafford in particular attractive for new entrants to the teaching profession. But it's also about targeting investments in the scale to the area of the scale where we think economic attrition is most likely, and that's that 5 to 15 range. We also thought it was important to lay out a proposal that would provide clarity to both staff, to future staff, about what they could expect in terms of how the board and how the community see their progression in compensation. And that they could see a future for themselves as well. That it was if I want to buy a house, I'm not looking at step 25 on the scale. I can look at something closer to step 10. But the last thing is that we wanted to make sure that the proposal we brought provided the appropriate flexibility to future school boards and future boards of supervisors as they consider what modifications need to be taken into account given fiscal realities. But we did think that these, the big changes that we're proposing were important to communicate now to send that powerful signal to get ahead of the potential economic attrition continuing to grow as we move forward. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Fulmer to say more about what the specific proposal looks like, and I'll also talk more about those comparison divisions.
Thank you, Patrick. So these hit a little bit more specific into the targets that Patrick mentioned, and we're at a high level. But over the 3-year period, looking at getting the starting pay up to $50,000, looking at eliminating that mid-career SAG, which is our biggest gaps that we currently have. And when we show you the charts on the next slide, you'll have a better visual. And we're also targeting the top of the scale where we want to reduce how long it takes to get to the top of the scale. So right now, to get to the top of our scale, it takes 39 years. And we looked at the top of the scale, and the dollar of that salary wasn't too far off from the top of the scale for our comparative divisions, but we take a lot longer to get there. So we want to take that 39 and back it down to 33, and 33 because you can fully retire, full benefits with the 30 years in VRS. In addition to that, you can retire with a PLOP at 31, 32, or 33. So we selected 33 because it was a little bit more economical instead of getting it all the way to 30, recognizing that you can retire with the full 3-year PLOP with 33 years of service as well. So this chart has all of the Northern Virginia school divisions, and I realize it's a lot on one chart. So on the following chart, once I jump to it, you'll see that we narrow it down a little bit to make it easier to read. But right now I want to point out that the 2 bottom scales are Spotsy's current scale and our current scale. And all of these scales, when I say current, it's actually everybody's current scales plus 3%, because with the assumption of investment from the state, over a 3-year period, their scales are going to at least increase by 3%. So if you take our scale and Spotsy's scales at the very bottom, you'll see they line up very closely. There's not much of a difference between Spotsy and Stafford County. The scales above that, I'll point out the dark blue line is Prince William County. We also show Fairfax, Arlington, and Alexandria and Loudoun. And these are the same localities that the county used for the public safety comparison with the addition of Fairfax. And as the reasons Patrick mentioned, and we can get into more detail, are the top 3 school divisions that we lose staff to are Spotsylvania, Prince William, and Fairfax. So we felt it was, we felt that we needed to include Fairfax in the discussion. At the same time, we're not trying to become Fairfax and we're not trying to become Prince William. You'll see that the large dash line that you see run in the middle, that's our proposed scale at the end of this 3 years. So point is that we're not trying to get all the way up to match Prince William or to match Fairfax, but we wanted to show them in the comparison because we do lose teachers to those divisions. So I'm going to jump to the next slide just because it's a little bit cleaner. We took off all the Northern Virginia school divisions except Prince William, and we showed an average of all the divisions. So once again, still the large dashed line is Stafford County. The blue is Prince William. The red line is that average. And then Stafford County's current scale, and then Spotsylvania is the yellow. So the biggest thing I want to point out, or one of the big points, is the starting salary is now at the $50,000 mark over 3 years. And that's a big tool for recruitment, But additionally, as we move up the scale, you'll see where the biggest gaps from our current scale up are in that mid-career SAG that Patrick mentioned, all the way up to the 25 mark. You'll start to see that it starts to slim back down, and it's not as big of an increase. But that's where we are the farthest behind the Northern Virginia school divisions. And I'll mention again, we are not trying to get all the way up there, but we are trying to close the gap to make it less tempting for our teachers to leave. Patrick has said, maybe not as, I think he alluded to it at least in this presentation, but he said it before, someone's not going to leave for $2,000 or $3,000 if they're happy where they're at. Are they going to leave for $15,000, $20,000? Most likely, yes. So if we can close that gap and reward our teachers and make it a lot more competitive, we'll have better success. Next slide is showing Prince William, Fairfax, and Spotsylvania compared to our current Stafford scale and our proposed Stafford scale. And it's not every step, but just for ease of reading it for the presentation, we showed the entry level up to the top of the scale with 5-year increments. So you'll see at the entry level, we're going from the $45,766 up to the $50,000 mark. Prince William, even at after our 3 years, assuming they only do a 3%, would still be ahead of us at their entry level as well as Fairfax. Jumping just to our mid-career, so that at the step 15, we're currently at $52,000 in Stafford. Prince William is at 74, Fairfax 76. And so we're proposing getting that up to $64,000. And I point that one out because that is that mid-career SAG number that we start to see the biggest increases. And then I'll jump to the top of our scale, where you're not going to see much of a change in the top of our scale, but the difference now is the top of our scale is 33 instead of the 39 that it is now. And I'll point that Prince William and Fairfax are still, Fairfax is 92, but Prince William is $126,000. Fairfax actually gets to the top of their scale at step 25. So what is the investment Stafford County Schools and Stafford County makes to try to retain and attract our teachers? I'm going to present this two different ways, so if we can separate them a little bit. The far left column, which is labeled 100%, that's the cost if we were going to do it in 1 year. So if we were going to take this and just do the scale enhancement right now in 1 year, it would be $20.9 million. If we want to do a similar approach as we did for public safety last year on the county side, they did the scale enhancement and then they also awarded the step. And the step would be $3.7 million. So it's a total of $24.5 million if we were to do it 100%, 1 year, knock it out in 2022. Recognizing that we wanted to bring multiple approaches to you, presenting it as a 3-year proposal with the first year of the scale enhancement, or breaking out the scale enhancement over 3 years evenly, and it's an even dollar amount. So the perfect, easiest example is if we have a step that's $6,000 behind, it would be a $2,000 jump each year. That's a total of $6.9 million each year, which is why it is an even investment each of the 3 years. We didn't look at taking a percentage increase each year. We just took it as an even dollar amount. Additionally, the step increase in year 1 would be 2.7 for a total of 9.6. And instead of reading each of these year 2s and years 3s, it basically comes out to an average of $10 million each year that we would invest into the teacher scale to do the enhancement plus the step increase. And the step increase is important, as the county heard during the public safety discussion. If we don't do the step increase and all of our competitors are doing the step increase, our scale actually starts to fall behind. So we have to shift our scale down in order to keep our teachers on the appropriate step based on their years of experience. And when we do that, depending on what the other divisions do, Prince William, part of the reason that they've been so successful is they have been rewarding steps for several years. I know the last 2 years, they've done it. So even the year we did 5%, they did a 3.5% step increase with the 1.5% across the board increase to each of their scales.
Chris, maybe you want to point out that's not all.
Yeah, and that's actually the next slide. So, a funding outlook. We know this will not be 100% local funding. The General Assembly already gave the governor direction when they last met for the governor to include salary increases for teachers in his proposal. And we'll know here in the next few weeks when the governor starts to present details of his budget, and then we'll have exact numbers of what's in the governor's proposal for how it impacts Stafford County specifically. The couple days before, like the holiday break, so December 18th, 19th, I don't know what the Thursday and Friday are exactly, but that's typically the time frame that the calc template comes out from the state. And that's where we can get the actual numbers of how it impacts Stafford County. But those funds from the county from the state can be used to invest in our teacher scale. It's not like that can only be for an across-the-board increase and then we still want to do the scale enhancement. Those funds will be able to be used for this. This would be, the scale enhancement for teachers would be a qualified expenditure in order to receive those incentive funds from the state. So what's next is, we've had this slide in here for a few weeks because we've presented this a few different times to our FAB and then to our full board and then now to the Joint Schools Working Committee. And then now the next step is to, the superintendent will present his full budget on January 26th. And want to mention that this proposal is only for licensed staff, and because that's where the biggest investment is. As a one-time or multiple-year approach. His proposal will still include, not to speak for him, but I'm sure he would tell you he has an intent of including across-the-board increases, other investments for our other staff. As you know, on the service side, we only were able to get employees up to the minimum of the market, and so we have a lot of compression on our scales, and I've showed the Board of Supervisors and the school board examples of that. Where even from 0 to 15 years, we have paraprofessionals, admin assistants, all making virtually the same at the entry level of the scale, as we were able to increase the bottom of our scale, but we didn't have the funds to actually give credit for years of experience. And that's a model we're working on now that Dr. Kisner will present in about a month and a half. There's additional slides in this, but we're not going to go over each of them. We just moved them to the back. So if you want to look at the additional information, feel free. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I know it was a lot of information, but we felt like we wanted you to see the why and the possible how and where we're going forward. Again, the board's still receiving this information, but it is, I would like to just say to our staff and to thank them, because you all know what it's like to get into these numbers and figuring out how do we become most competitive and how do we create something for Stafford that works so that we keep and retain the best staff possible. So we just thought it was, we wanted to present that tonight because we had talked some about it. So if you have any specific questions, I know also mindful of the time, but if there was anything specific or something that you would like additional information on in general, we may not answer those questions tonight. We may just kind of take those questions in for further reporting in the future.
I would just like one that's not in here, and just for another time, of incentive programs that we have to bring in teachers. And so what do those look like? Because I know we have incentive programs, and I just think I would just like to know what they look like. So, and maybe that's part of the budget, and I don't know. So thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right. Hearing none, we have two other items, and I think we'll make our probably hour and 15 minutes if we're quick. But this came up at the FAB meeting. They asked us just to bring this forward about joint wellness initiatives for all county staff. We were just wanting to open that dialogue. We are trying, I know, on the school side and about having wellness coordinators in our buildings because, as we all know, COVID has a huge impact, and we just wanted to throw out, again, if there were ways we could combine, health, wellness initiatives, that we just wanted to open that door. I know we do But that was something on our FAB just asked us to bring up, and just to put it probably on our two leaders here, but just to keep our ears and eyes open of ways that we may be able to combine. Eventually, when we don't have these masks, I'm looking forward to maybe some softball games again, but Patrick.
To add a little color onto this, one of the things we have been working on since earlier this calendar year, though of course it's taken a little bit of a spin since March, is finding ways, cost-effective ways to invest in and prioritize the wellness of staff. The approach we've taken as a start that I think has also been particularly beneficial this year, given the current environment, is a building-focused orientation. Each of our buildings has a wellness ambassador that's a staff member. It's a volunteer position presently, where that person serves as a go-between between a member of my team as well as folks in our student services office that have some expertise in both physical and mental wellness. And we're relying on folks in schools to try to coordinate some endeavors within their school buildings with that idea of the closer you are to the people, the more likely you are to be able to target the activity towards their needs. The other advantage to this is that by doing it at a more localized basis and by emphasizing things that are more about shared accountability and joint participation while separate, you can maintain social distance while still prioritizing those things. We've also spent a little bit more time on mental wellness, particularly this fall, as opposed to physical. But I know that and what the FAB discussed, what Dr. Kisner has raised on a number of occasions, is that as we do start to steer out of the pandemic, we look forward to being able to do events again. We look forward to being able to be far more active in engagement with the business community and with the community writ large in things that we're doing. And so some of the things that were raised by the FAB were things like, well, would it make sense for the schools in the county to go in together and approaching local businesses about some sort of, whether it's a discount or a preferential fee or something about participation in a gym or about those types of partnerships for events that might be beneficial for both staff. So it's just looking for those types of efficiencies if that was a priority for the county as well.
Yeah, go ahead. So I guess when I think of wellness, I think many times of some of these young people that have a tremendous amount of energy in the high schools. Have you thought about having some kind of a competition or inviting the high school students that are interested in, yoga or name the activity, them coming in and actually running the activities on behalf of the schools, because, every building loves to have the young people in there. And I think they're not one of their peers. So it makes it a little bit more fun and maybe not as intimidating, if you will. And everybody wants to be around young people, right? I do. It makes me feel younger.
Depends on
I don't
how
know.
young.
It was just a thought.
I know some schools do it individually. Like I know North Stafford had sent out an email made me feel really, really old because it didn't come to me. It came to my daughter, alumni. So they did have, Ms. Samansky had sent out an email asking for prior students. So they have individual teachers against students. So they just need to expand some of these programs, I guess.
If you will. So I'm thinking about like the program that Forge coordinates, the YES program. Is that what it's called? Yes, isn't it called YES? Yeah, where we have the high school kids that sit on some of the boards and commissions. And they've all been awesome, as you know. The one that we've had a couple on the R board, the landfill board, and the one of them was sitting out in the audience, and I said, "Oh no, you're up here with us. You don't get to vote, but you get to participate in the decision-making process." So even if it's not one, maybe one, a combination of, I'll say boys and girls, but they're really young men and women in high school, get together and do something together to collaborate with the teachers and.
Yeah, I absolutely love your idea of engaging the high school kids. we were also looking at, you know, I'll use my daughter as an example. She works for a law firm in Richmond. She's actually been offered better positions in larger law firms, but she loves a law firm in Richmond because they sponsor soccer leagues, they sponsor marathon running. They have a real feeling like we want to take care of our employees' wellness. And a lot of people we hire are young people, 22, 24, 25, and a lot of them are new to Stafford. And so one of the things what we see as a benefit that maybe the other school systems north of us don't provide, and it's not about the paycheck, is to create where people feel like they belong, there's activities. And for a 22-year-old and a 42-year-old and a 62-year-old, there might be different things that people would appreciate doing. So, but I also see this as a way of keeping people here. If they see this as a place where we take care of our folks and we have fun, there's nothing wrong with having fun, might be a benefit that's maybe as valuable, if maybe not more valuable, than having a bigger paycheck, to use my daughter as an example.
And if I may build, if I can build on what Dr. Kirchner has said to connect the two topics, it is, you know, salary and benefits are not the solution to all retention problems, and that is not the purpose of our proposal earlier this evening. But it's staying in shouting distance of your competitors is where you can have those other factors really kick in and shine, where the community benefit and the sense of belonging that Dr. Kirchner just spoke of can really start to kick in to make up that gap.
And just maybe it's another way that we can engage also with our Parks and Rec staff. We're trying to kind of broaden the big picture of saying, we know right now we're a little trapped, but it's something we're really thinking about, wellness in the big picture, and wanting to make that, again, as part of like a total package of benefits. But we also thought it would be a neat thing to also partner with our county, because you
Sure.
too are recruiting like we are.
And I know Shannon in our office has been doing a lot with our wellness program, her team. We have, you know, an app that people can track all their activities. They can earn points for different things they do. We have wellness hikes on a regular basis where go all over the state and even out of the state and do hikes on the weekends, and people can earn points for those types of things. We have, you know, rec teams right in the, you know, community center over next to you all, you know, volleyball and things like that before COVID, obviously. You know, so there's a lot of activities we do. We'd be happy to connect with you all and find a way to do those things together and maybe build on them.
Shannon and I have a longstanding promise that we're going to get together for coffee, but when it's okay to get together for coffee
Yeah.
again.
So you still have coffee, you just have to sit across the room. It's okay.
I just also wanted to take the opportunity to give an example on something that Ms. Shelton and I had worked on. It was COVID, but we decided to just go ahead Juneteenth. We just used the Parks and Recs and used that whole just brought the community together and brought everybody out for that occasion, because it was a hard time for our community with everything that was going on. And so I do thank you for that and pushing forward to help me with that. The community very, very much enjoyed it. Dr. Kisner was there. So that's just an example on what we've done together, even though I don't know if you were aware or that Ms. Shelton had helped out with that endeavor. Yeah.
I mean, wellness, like we could use the culinary arts.
Yeah.
How you cook.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be all physical activity. You scare me with the high school kids, I gotta be honest with you. They'll enjoy it.
Mics.
Turn your mic on, Dr. Kisner.
Cares about hearing from me, okay. But we were thinking, you know, doing it jointly. This might be something that both, all county employees could benefit. Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. I'm looking forward to the competitions.
Yep.
Yes.
So our final one is just a legislative update. I don't know if we've had any additional things that have come down. I know we're going to begin to get rolling. I don't think any of ours have really changed about the ADM. That's our big one. One thing that did come up last night when we were talking, and we really don't want you to tell your other counties and cities that we're doing this, that our amazing head of transportation, we are having an issue, of course, as always, getting bus drivers. When they were going and finding out when that bus driver could get tested, they said, well, gosh, we'll see you in March. We don't need you, I mean, we want you in March, but we'd really need you next week. Mr. Sudduth has been amazing, and his staff, that having DMV come and maybe do testing here but on the broader legislative front, this may be such small potatoes, but if there can be fast tracking for, and I won't just say, for people who need to be in transportation, not having to call into DMV and wait 3 months to get in for initial licensure. I have no idea if that's something we could ask for preferential treatment. And because Stafford has gone out and broken the mold on how to get it there, so I give that to ours. But at some point, I'm just throwing that out, and you all may have other transportation needs too. But if we're finding that our transportation folks, and there's people who want to get their CDL and they're saying, hey, we'll see you in 3-4 months, if there's something maybe legislatively, or I'm just throwing it out as another idea. So I just wanted to let you all be aware of that.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk to Treasurer Laura Rudy about that and see if there's a way we can work together. Absolutely. Laura Rudy, the treasurer, since she runs the DMV Select program.
Yeah, can I just add something that's completely not related, but just to remind you, I know there was an issue, or a small issue, about people becoming CPR and first aid certified, and I talked to our fire and rescue, and they said unequivocally they would love to, if you guys have a need, that they would be glad to step in and help fill that. So just didn't know if you got that message.
I think some of that was, I think we were good, but great for the offer if we need it for CPR. All right, do we want to go ahead and plan our next meeting, or what works best, since we're all in the room?
So I will say that I won't be the chair next year, since that will be a new chair.
That's right.
Since we can only serve for 1 year as chair of the Board of Supervisors. So I will be handing the gavel gladly over to another one of my colleagues, to be named later on January 5th. So you could go ahead and set it, and then we could see if it works for he or she.
And I know with budget coming up, I know there's a lot of different meetings. And like I said, I'm not trying to put it off because I know it's easier when we're here, but I know even for all of us, we have different meetings. Do we want to try and stick with a Wednesday in general, or would we like to come back with some options?
I think you're better off typically
Yep.
setting it now.
I do too.
Because once you try to work with everybody's calendar, if you have a set day, people kind of set that day aside for that next. And I don't know who's going to be, we don't know who's going to be on joint schools until January 5th. So we'll try to have some continuity, but it's always up in the air.
With that, can I make a suggestion? I don't know if it's a good one or not, but
sure.
for if we're going to have change in guards, when we're bringing items to the agenda, will we be able to say if it's school or Board of Supervisors or an all for a combination of the two? Just so we will see where it's coming from. Yeah?
I'm sorry, Pam, can you say that again? I didn't hear. And it's not you, it's my ears.
So on the agenda for discussions, if we could put between brackets or somewhere on the topic, like where it came from.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
just between brackets, school.
Oh, I
or-
gotcha. Okay,
Especially
sure.
after a week.
Yep.
I'm aging, so.
How about January 6th? And to your point, Ms. Hazard, I think we're hot and heavy on budget, and some of the items that we've talked about are going to play into that. So what do you think about January 6th?
The only
So I just wanted to say, for me, Wednesday will not be a good day if I'm on the board, if the meeting is at 5:30. So the earliest I could make on a Wednesday is 7.
I would say the 6th. The only reason I'm saying that's a little tight for our staff, I think for all staff to get a little bit of a break in between, I was thinking more like either the 13th or probably the 21st, because the 20th is Inauguration Day, so. just
Can
get
you
21st.
ask Dr. Chase if that's every Wednesday going forward for the next coming
Is
year?
Dr. Chase, is Thursday
It's
better?
it's every Wednesday.
Okay, so we then, if we want to change the date now?
I can do Wednesday at 7, I just can't do Wednesday at 5:30 or
That's-
6.
And
7 is
also,
bedtime
if-
for me.
Yeah, and Madam Chairman, with social distancing, if we want to use the board chambers, the Planning Commission has meetings in there on Wednesdays, which I think
Thursday?
is why we're here tonight.
It is.
Do we want to move it to Thursday
Looking to
then?
Thursdays seem to.
Can you do Thursday?
I can do any time on Thursday.
Ms. Fanucci?
That's fine with me. The 21st is fine with me.
Thursdays, we were
Thursday.
talking about
The
Thursdays.
13th, not the 21st.
No, 13th is
Oh,
a
the
Wednesday. We were
14th.
looking at the
14th,
14th or the
Wednesday.
21st was going to be my
We're
suggestion.
talking
Yeah.
about Thursdays, so moving it
The
from Wednesday to
21st
Thursday.
would be better, I think.
It gives a little more time. How about we tentatively say the 21st at 5:30? To be D, but at least we have something planned. Yes. Governance Committee? I do, I see that. We can, this is a larger group to work through. We can always talk with,
Back up.
about that one, because that may be a subcommittee,
We could have
meeting.
somebody,
21st, 5:30?
21st? 21st is what, a Wednesday or Thursday?
It's a Thursday.
Thursday. So. No, not on Thursday. You
No,
have
right now I've got it
governance
as
on
the governance
Thursday?
committee meeting. We may work through, 21st.
Madam Chair, I have an ask. If we wait till the 21st, is it possible that within the school board, you guys can have a discussion about a couple of the items that we had today and don't wait until our meeting to bring it forward, whatever you have? Because it is going to be such a big player in our CIP, or not our CIP, but all our budget. So I would just, just an ask. So.
I mean, I think we can have a discussion. I don't know if I can tell you that the board will have made any definitive decisions. There may be some areas that we're going to be looking into, cost, but we will make sure that we will have at least had one discussion on the 12th, which would be our first meeting. So we can add that and then bring, like I said, it may be a longer-term discussion. It's a huge request, but I think to get our ideas would be great.
So if we need to do that, should we have a work session with the board? So we could discuss these and Mary Washington and all, just do it all together?
Yes, I think we
Okay.
will put something about envisioning, even other structures and other ideas we may have.
Yeah, because I would think that Dr. Kisner needs to talk to his leadership team and see what cost and more importantly, does it even make sense? Are there any programs that you would consider putting over there? Maybe there are some little ideas that have already been germinated in your leadership team that just haven't floated up to the top yet, but obviously only you know that.
So we will look into that. I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Let's put the 21st at 5:30 for now as at least a placeholder. We'll start there, and then if there is change within committee, we can move from there, but at least we have a placeholder. So to everybody, have a wonderful holiday if we don't see you, when we will see you.
Are we having any Christmas
2021.
hangover
See you next
party?
year.
And Mayor, congratulations.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, everybody, and everybody have a safe drive home and
Happy holidays.
great holiday, and we'll see you at the beginning.